Welcome to Making Retirement Make Sense, the podcast that helps you build a better retirement. Each episode, you'll hear from the industry experts about the issues that matter most to your plan, no matter where you're at on your retirement journey. From pre-retirement to the later years, we've got you covered. Let's make retirement make sense together.
Welcome to Making Retirement Make Sense. I'm your host, CJ Miller, joined today by co-host Dana Anspa. Dana, how are you?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here, CJ.
Absolutely. We are so excited to talk about today's episode. We're going to be talking about how to protect yourself from financial fraud in retirement. And this is a topic that is definitely a hot button issue today. We were reading in preparation for this episode, AARP recently summarized a recent FTC report detailing financial fraud. And there's some really troubling and interesting statistics that come out of this. The FTC received the same number of fraud reports in 2024 as in 2023 at 2.6 million, but with far higher loss amounts, which means that the scammers are getting better. There's unfortunately, there's no question about it. There were also about 1.14 million reports of identity theft last year, and 450,000 of those were related to credit card fraud.
Wow.
And so you might not even see something leaving your bank account in those cases. It's just somebody takes a credit card out in your name and racks up debt. And very interesting is some of the means that we'll talk about today of how people are actually, achieving some of this fraud. Email was the most common way scammers approach their victims, followed by phone and text. And criminals also favored social media platforms. So on our agenda today, we're going to start by spilling some tea because we both have some personal stories and examples of client fraud that we've dealt with throughout our careers. So with that, Dana, what's your first story?
Well, what came to mind as you were talking in terms of email fraud was some situations we've encountered here in the firm over the years where somebody emailed us and pretended to be the client. And so it sounds kind of bizarre. In our case, we're trained to recognize when these things happen. And in one case, the person had pretended to be the client so effectively that they read through the entire email history with the person's financial advisor, asked how his daughter was doing, if she was back from camp yet. I mean, they knew everything about this advisor, so it sounded like a very natural conversation that they might be having. And that's what made it so scary. But in this case, the advisor felt like the tone was off, something wasn't right. They asked for money, and so they picked up the phone and called. That's as we're trained to do, pick up the phone and call. But you think about, how does this happen? Well, what happens in most cases is someone has hacked into your email. You don't know they're there. It's called email lurking. We hear about social media lurkers, people who watch but don't participate. Well, there's email lurking too. So someone's in there, they're watching all your documents go back and forth, or they're reading what your upcoming transactions are and looking for a way to interject themselves and pretend to be you. So that's what first came to mind when you read those statistics, that email was the number one way. Now, I have some other stories, but I hadn't heard those statistics. Yeah. I know you had gathered them, but right. I'm just hearing them fresh. So Was there other things that came to your mind as you were reading them?
Well, no, I think the email lurking is such an important point because a lot of people think that they're not going to fall for the fraud because they hear examples and they go, oh, I would never fall for that. But what you don't realize is that these hackers, they will monitor your email and wait for a matter of circumstance. And so I'll give you an example. I had an internship almost a decade ago. It's actually where I met Dana at Charles Schwab. And they did a phishing test. And one intern clicked on the link. And the reason was because the email prompt was, it was something about an auto accident claim. Well, he happened to have just gotten in an auto accident, so he didn't think twice about it. And so that's always how these things happen. And there was a story here in Arizona not too long ago where a couple was buying their first house and they had all of their life savings on the line. And somebody had been lurking in their emails for who knows how long. Like, this doesn't happen instantly. They often will gather a lot of personal information about you so that they can mimic and come off as legitimate. And they basically sent a fraudulent wire form for the house purchase, and that family lost everything because they sent it to the wrong place. And so, we all think we're not going to be victims of it, but time and time again, we just see it. And it's almost always because of a matter of unlucky circumstance that causes you to let your guard down.
Yeah, let your guard down, or you're just not aware of how these things happen. We warn clients all the time not to email certain things or certain documents, and they do it anyway. So there could be signatures, there could be account numbers, it could have been a wire form. Someone intercepted that because you didn't know that they had hacked your email account, and now they have all of the information. They can just change the account number. It already has your signature on it, and they can forward it along. So yes, it is unlucky, absolutely, but it is also a case of, we all get lazy at times. It's a lot of work to use all these security measures and log in, and it's a pain and you get frustrated. And so when you say let your guard down, right, I think it's letting your guard down, or sometimes we just don't realize the importance. It's like, that's not going to happen to me.
Right. Well, I mean, in a way, it's almost like wearing, your helmet with your bike. And, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be an issue if you don't have your helmet, but you're not wearing it for the 9 times out of 10, right? You're wearing it for the 1 time out of 10. And in these cases, if, the more laxed you are with your, security, ultimately that 1 time out of 10 can be far more severe.
Yeah. Now, another story that's not quite email or text or social media scam that I had encountered recently was with a friend of mine who is a fellow pickleball player. For those of you who have followed me for some time, I've traded in motorcycle riding for pickleball. Oof, kind of crazy. But anyway, much safer. But my friend was sharing this story. So unbeknownst to them, his wife's computer had gotten hacked. And so there was someone there who was logging all of the keystrokes. Well, one of the keystrokes that got logged was their banking account login. So next thing they knew, they logged into Chase Bank and there was $40,000 gone. So it's a pretty substantial sum missing out of your account. They were able to work with Chase. Ultimately, they were able to be put whole in this case. I'm not sure if Chase just decided to cover it, but initially the reaction was, this is a legitimate login. So there was, how would the bank know, right? It was the right user ID. It was the right password. Well, what had happened is she had downloaded something onto the computer, and it could have been a click. Actually, I said it wasn't email related, but
it could have been.
It could have been, right? It could have been she clicked on something in an email, unbeknownst to her, it downloaded a virus, a program that is called a remote access tool, and it just is hanging out there. You don't know it's there, and they gathered all of their information that way. And there was actually a crazy article in the Wall Street Journal. I think we have a quote from it. I'm going to find it on my notes here. It was about a Disney worker that got hacked. So this was Wall Street Journal, February of this year. And the article talks about how hackers have built a variety of malicious tools called info stealers that hide in software that people download from the internet. The hackers swipe their credentials, which are resold online. Stolen credentials, let me say that right. Stolen credentials were used in nearly 40% of financially motivated cyber intrusions last year. That's significant. So just not even being aware that there's software on your computer that's tracking all of this, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you find is, especially with companies, like when we talk to IT professionals just in our line of work, when there are instances of a breach, especially at a large company like that, it takes a very long time to figure out the source of the breach because there are all these different ways and vulnerabilities basically within the system. A very good friend of mine is actually getting married in a few weeks. He studied computer engineering at University of Illinois, and he was talking to me once about cybersecurity and passwords. And basically what he said is that the way a lot of these hackers operate is it's almost like they walk up to a neighborhood and they're just trying every door waiting to find the one that's unlocked. And it's the same thing with this. They might have tested hundreds of thousands of Disney employees' logins that they were able to access on the dark web and just waited to find the right code to break in.
Well, actually, in this case, the article goes on to explain because they had tracked down how it happened. And yes, what you described does happen where they're just trying every door. But in this case, this person used a password manager, which we will talk about, but they didn't use any additional security protocols on the password manager. And so we'll talk about two-factor authentication. But I believe in the second part of this article, yes, as they investigated his break-in, Van Andel realized that the key to his kingdom, the 1Password account, wasn't itself protected by a second factor. It required just a username and password by default, and he hadn't taken the extra step of turning on two-factor authentication.
Wow.
So that simple step of, turning on two-factor where people can guess your passwords very easily. I know we're going to talk about that. Should we talk about that now?
We can.
Yeah, let's do it. So CJ and I have this cool graph, but it comes from a cybersecurity company called Hive Systems, and it talks about how quickly people can hack your passwords. So if you're using a numbers-only password that's 8 characters, they can hack it instantly. It's kind of crazy. When you look at our password requirements internally, I think we like 16, but there's some programs we use that won't allow 16. So 14 characters if you use numbers, upper and lowercase letters, symbols. 119, is that billion years? I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah, there's
19 billion years, right?
Yeah, for context for people.
Or trillion. No, that's a trillion.
Yeah, well, so that's if you use an 18 character password and you use numbers, upper and lowercase letters and symbols, so this is the most secure password, it would take 463 quintillion years.
I don't even know how to count.
So
like
that's the range. It's instantly and quintillion. And we don't really deal in quintillions around here. So it's pretty rare. But just to show you the scale, and it makes sense, right? It's really just permutation math. Like the way these password protectors get broken is basically they test every single possible combination. So the more variables you add, the more combinations you have, and statistically it just becomes impossible. And it's vitally important because the technology is just getting better and faster and more efficient at that kind of computing. And people are going to be able to use that for the wrong reasons.
And how many people set something up and use something simple? They might use 1, 2, 3, 4. They might use banana. They might use, their child's name, something that doesn't have a lot of variety, something that, according to this table, can be broken by a software program that was designed for that purpose instantly. So, and then they reuse passwords, right? Same password. So there's a password leak. It gets out there on the dark web. People access it, and then they go take that combination of username and credentials, and they try it on everything that's out there. And thus, if you're reusing the password, you are even at greater vulnerability for some of your other accounts getting hacked.
And that's what's really cool about password protectors is that a lot of them will have some kind of security screening. So when you start adding passwords to the database, it's going to tell you how many are reused, how many are weak, how many you should change. And so, there's I think a big value proposition for those softwares, not just for business use, but also for personal.
Absolutely. We highly recommend password managers, but we also recommend that you have additional security using two-factor or authentication apps. So it's not just, with a password manager, it remembers a lot of complex passwords for you, and you only have one password you need to know to log in. But again, if you don't have additional two-factor on that's not very secure. 1Password can be hacked.
So let's talk about two-factor a little bit, because I think it confuses people sometimes. For me, I try not to give out my email to anybody unless I absolutely have to, because I don't like spam. But a lot of the time, so people are hesitant to give out that personal information, on a variety of websites. But when I think about two-factor, there's really 3 mediums for it, right? There's email is one. I think that's the most, I would say, archaic in a way. The other is text. So you get a text to your phone. And then the third way is more modern, and I think it's the most efficient, and it's basically an authentication app. And so Google has one, Microsoft has one, there's a variety of providers, but basically it will send a code that refreshes every 60 seconds. And I remember even before they had the technology, Schwab's required this for a long time. You used to actually be able to get a physical, right? Is that right, Dana? Where you could get a physical
this
two-factor.
little key fob, and it would have a new code every 30 seconds. So that's not a whole lot of time if you're, get distracted and you're like, wait, no.
So I think authentication is the gold standard. And what's nice about a lot of the authentication apps is they'll have all of your passwords listed, like the codes for each website. So you're not, getting confused or having to download multiple apps.
Yeah, and they say the authentication apps are even more secure than text, something to do with SIM card fraud. And if your phone can get broken into, then a whole nother area we're not going into. But all I know, don't know the why, but I know that the authentication apps are considered more secure than the text message. But don't let that deter you. Set up two-factor. Even if it's text message code that's coming to you, it's better than not having it. If someone hacks your password, they don't have your phone, well, they're not going to be able to get in. So that's really critical.
Yeah, it is 100% worth the effort. And really the biggest downside is if you lose your phone or have to change your phone number, then you have to reset everything. But that's just ultimately, the risk you take.
Now, I know one of the things you mentioned was social media, but there's also social engineering pop-ups that can happen. And I think you had a crazy client story of something that happened, was it earlier this year?
Yeah, it was earlier this year. So a very current story. And it's something that's completely changed my perspective on why some of these instances happen. And a lot of what we've talked about so far is digital mechanisms, right? It's what can you do to protect yourself digitally? What tools can you use? But really, like any risk, a lot of it manifests, as behavioral. And so, that's really social engineering. That's what it's all about, right? They find a way to access you. And the idea is that they manipulate you, these criminals, into doing something you wouldn't ordinarily do. And, they are very, very savvy at that. And what we found is that the older you get, the more susceptible you tend to be to these kinds of, occasions. So this particular client story, client lives out of state, and I'm just drinking coffee one day in the morning, checking emails, getting ready to come into the office. And I get a Slack message, just like our internal communication tool from Carrie, one of my colleagues. And she says, I'm on the phone with client A, and he's acting a little unusual. And he said he just wants us to know that he's not leaving sensible money. And we said, okay. I said, that's great validation. I didn't think that was at risk. But let's dig a little deeper. And so then client A starts explaining that, he had been hacked, and that, his Chase Bank had been, his entire branch had been compromised, and that he was working with this individual to, secure things. And it turns out that individual was the fraudster. And so, we tracked down everything, but effectively what happened to this client is that he received a pop-up on one of his devices, and it was basically saying, your device has been compromised, you need to call the Apple store, but it included the phone number on the pop-up. And so that's what he clicked, thinking he was calling Apple. The Apple representative, right, ended up keeping him on the phone for hours and hours and hours, because that's part of the mission, right? They want to wear you down so that you're mentally exhausted and you're anxious and you're afraid, and then you'll make mistakes and they'll build trust with you, just like any good salesperson can. And so ultimately this person convinced him that, to fix it, they need to basically, deposit money into, an ATM. But in order to do that, right, because their Chase account also apparently got hacked as part of this once they accessed the device. And so it's this big roundabout story to basically say that, hey, you need to go to an ATM and deposit cash. And it got so sophisticated that they literally said, do not call your Chase branch, because we have evidence to believe that your branch manager is compromised, which is somebody that the client knew personally. The bank was at Bank of America. And so,
Chase.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. It's Chase.
Or either one, it could happen.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And so this client, is basically in a panic. And then, we explained that the whole thing was, a fraud. And, he ended up depositing money into this random ATM. And, ultimately Chase did not make him whole in that case, because it wasn't really a Chase issue, which is a really big, problem, right? Because ultimately with human error, the bank's not liable like they would be if a bank account got hacked.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really important that people are diligent. And something, one of my key takeaways from it is that ultimately cognitive decline sets in for everybody. This particular client's very intelligent, was a professor, right? They had many, I'd say, very sophisticated conversations about investments and the economy with us. But ultimately, what ends up happening is over time, anybody can be, like I said before, in a matter of circumstance, caught off guard and put in a position where they're going to make mistakes. And, the older you get, the more likely it is that that's going to happen.
My brain splintered into about 3 different directions as you were telling that story. And so I was shuffling through my cards going, oh my gosh, where do we go next? There's so much there. One of the things that came to my mind as you were talking was cognitive decline. And I know we've seen some studies and stats on how financial decision-making changes as you age. And so that's one of the things to be aware of is, cognitive decline shows up first in your financial decision-making. And there's a report that we can reference that goes along with this podcast that illustrates some of that. It also illustrates how your decision-making, your financial decision-making can change as you age. So that is just something to be aware of. Not fun to think about, but it does change.
And I think the key is just to be aware of it so that you know when to ask for help. Or for a lot of our clients are dealing with aging parents. And so what ends up happening with the report details from the Alliance of Lifetime Income is that cognitive decline historically, or even, if you're 60, you're probably thinking about it like, oh, I might get dementia or Alzheimer's one day. And if I don't have those, then I'm good. But they have also what's called MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And that impacts, the majority of people over 80, period, regardless. And so, as you age, you just naturally are going to deal with some kind of cognitive impairment.
Question, was that the majority of people over 80 or over 60?
I think it's not. So I think it hits 50%. We can pull up the chart. I don't have the printout.
Okay.
But there's a chart basically, and it shows the percentage that goes up each year.
Goes up each year. That's right. Yeah.
And so there's a break even where basically at a certain point, it's 50%, basically a coin flip.
Wow.
And that also means that for most people, as they age, it gets worse.
Yeah.
And so it's not an all or nothing, issue. And so, we find that even with our clients dealing with aging parents, how do you protect them from it? And I think a lot of it comes down to those behavioral, like trying to get your 80-year-old mother to download a multi-factor authentication tool. It's going to be extremely difficult, right? So really the baby step is, hey, let's make sure we have our power of attorneys locked in. Let's make sure that we have honest discussions with, our parents or our children when we're that age about, basically how we're going to be able to ask for help when needed and, protect ourselves. And that's my favorite thing that some of our clients do is when those cases come up, going to a trusted source should be your first option. You shouldn't kind of roll the dice and say, hey, I'm going to try to Google the answer or solve this for myself. You should be saying, okay, I need to call a family member or a friend that I trust to get a second opinion, or, a financial professional that I'm working with to basically say, hey, help, I need it. I'm not sure what's going on here.
Yeah, and we have people often send us emails and say, is this legitimate? It might be, is this person really work for you? It might be an email they forward to us from Charles Schwab to say, is this email I received legit? It might be, is there anything I need to do? Should I actually click on this? Or, what should I do? It might be other things going on in their life. So we have clients ask us about things going on with their parents, things that they might, emails they might get from other institutions where they just want a second pair of eyes to say, is this legit and what should I do? And it's interesting when you think about aging. So another article that we were reading was on thestreet.com. And so that was this October. So it's a very recent article. And they talked about getting a letter from the Supreme Court where the letter is addressed to you personally. It uses forged signatures of Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly. And the scammers claim that you are a suspect in criminal proceedings. And then they will say that your Social Security number has been compromised and that you can't keep more than $10,000 in a bank. And they will threaten you with a full liability and loss of your Social Security number. So you can get these letters that you or I might go, I just throw that out, right? But if you combine that with perhaps, cognitive decline, even mild cognitive decline, people who are as sophisticated in being aware of these scams, all of the social engineering scams, which was the story you told, it was technically social engineering.
Right.
They're designed to manipulate you. They're designed to, scare you. They're designed to get you not thinking right. And you might think, what? How could they keep this person on the phone for 4 hours? That would be ridiculous. Someone would spot this. But when your emotions and your adrenaline get going, you don't think clearly, right? You're not in your rational brain. And a lot of people will describe the experience later as almost being hypnotized, as if something kind of took over and they don't even understand. They're like, wow, I should have recognized that. But that's that knack that the scammers have for tapping into the emotional side.
You may have experienced a taste of that emotion if you've ever sat through a timeshare presentation. It's a very similar sales tactic, although not fraudulent. So timeshare industry, don't come after me. Yeah, it is concerning. And that's the hardest part because it's one thing to say, hey, I stepped on a rake on my computer and it was just, oh, my bad. But it's totally different to have somebody actually personally coming to you and manipulating you. There are all other types of frauds that we haven't covered yet that are less mainstream. Like one is romance fraud. Tell us a little bit about that, Dana.
Oof. Well, luckily that's one I haven't fallen for, although I'm surprised. But I do have. So my husband has a relative that lives in Australia, I believe, and so he used to call all the time, and then he would be telling my husband about this new gal he'd met from the States, and she was just beautiful and younger than him. And, he was sending her money so she could fly over. And we were like, no, don't do it. And that happened a few times. And this person just kept falling for it, And so sometimes there can be some mental health issues that may contribute to that. But other times it can simply be loneliness, right? Later, maybe someone loses a spouse, and so they meet someone on social media, the exchange starts. I get all these texts right now as an example. They're like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
And that can be as simple as getting a text that says, hey, how you doing? And you reply to it, who is this? And they go, oh, isn't this so-and-so? Oh, well, I'm looking for, and they start a dialogue with you. And next thing you know, you're in a conversation. If you're lonely, it might feel nice to have someone to talk with. And then that's how those romance scams start. And it's crazy. Next thing you know, you could be sending them money. You could be investing together. I've seen quite a few articles on that. Oh, they build this friendship through text message, through social media. And, oh, I just heard about this investment. And here's the link to open the account. And the whole thing is fake. So you click on the link, you put all your information in, you send the money, and really you just sent your money offshore in most cases.
It's kind of frightening, Dana, because online dating is now so normalized. And, when you think about these kinds of scams, they're not new, right? And, we'll talk about other types of financial scams. And the reality of them is they've been around forever. And people are greedy and manipulative, and they prey on other people all the time. And for money is just one of the many things they can try to gain. But like back in, say, the 60s and 70s, before internet and widespread communication, you'd have people going from town to town making up fake identities. Well, it's very difficult to do that in 2025. You get found out pretty much right away. But instead, it's almost like we've opened this can of worms where you can pretend to be anybody and create fake profiles. And now with AI, it's even crazier. So, I think it's just going to get harder and harder to vet these kinds of things, even with AI, being able to create full lifelike videos of potentially fake people.
Yeah, it's definitely more challenging. It just, like so many things, takes education, right? You raise your level of awareness about what to watch out for. I know we've talked and shared some stories. What are things that people can do to protect themselves? We've talked about a few of them. Use good passwords.
Yeah.
Use two-factor authentication. What else?
Well, I think a really important strategy to be cognizant of is be careful with what you click on. And so many of these strategies or these cons kind of start with something that and you're familiar with. And there's a sense of urgency, not always like, hey, your house is on fire urgency, but just enough to get you going, hey, I need to address this right away. Oftentimes, and we get them all the time in financial services, it'll be, hey, your Chase account, you have a new message. That's all it'll say. And it'll say, click this link. Well, we know that basically any banking institution's not going to send us a link to click on directly. Anything we need to be able to access, we can do so by logging in online or on the app on our phone. And so that's my first piece of advice is no matter who's sending you a link to click on, do not click on it. Go to the source. And the source will have that. And ultimately, if you're not sure, ask customer service. Because sometimes it can be legitimate, but most, especially big companies have stopped doing the email links for that reason. It's ultimately, I get almost daily emails from Dana asking me to go pick up gift cards from Target and Starbucks. And then you click on the email URL and you realize that's not Dana. Although they're very worded nicely. It'll often say something like, oh, CJ, you are such a great employee. Please run to Target for me today. Dana Anspa, CEO.
Yeah, we have staff, they get text messages, quote, from me, it says, on Friday afternoons or on the weekends asking them to go pick up gift cards. And it's bizarre. They know how to check in with me directly via secure communication channels. And we've never had anyone fall for those, but I've definitely seen those. Another thing I know we train on internally is how to spot where the email comes from. So, for example, an email comes in and it's difficult to do on your phone, but if you are on your computer, it's a lot easier to see there's like how the email shows the name and then the actual email address. And sometimes it can be something like it could look like it was coming from your financial institution with an I instead of an L or an L instead of an I, a simple letter change, an S instead of a letter. And so you don't really notice it. If you don't look carefully, it looks like a legitimate email address. Sometimes we'll have emails and what they do is spoof the name so it could look like it came from me, but when you look at the email address, it's got a bunch of weird characters and, it's bizarre. It came from a Gmail account or Hotmail account or somewhere else. And so you really have to be trained to pay attention and say, where did this email come from? And if you can't see it clearly on your phone, just don't click on it. Nothing's that urgent. We are click happy.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely we are. And it's funny you mentioned the emails because a lot of the time they are crafty. Like it'll be like from @schwab.com, but the H will be missing, like something you might not catch if you're reading it too quickly. But occasionally you'll get one and it's like, it says it's Dana Anspa or some financial institution and you click on the URL and it's like Adnan Ruiz 316 at Gmail. And it's like, I think they're going to catch that guy. It's not very covert. So, it definitely happens.
Yeah.
Now, Dana, we talked about what we think of kind of overhyped things that maybe don't move the needle but are talked about a lot, things like freezing credit or credit monitoring. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have mixed thoughts. I know you and I were talking about that the other day on freezing credit, although when you were reading off the stats, you mentioned credit card fraud as one of the things. Now, I don't know the details of that, so I'd be curious to know, is it credit card fraud in terms of people opening new accounts? Or, for example, I was reviewing transactions on one of my cards, and I think it was right at year end, and there was a random $100 to some organization I'd never heard of. And so I looked it up and it said it was a charity. And I'm 100% sure the whole thing was a fraud. I reported it. I was credited back the funds. But that could be, another form of credit card fraud where people are just trying small transactions. I don't know how they got the number. Obviously you have to replace the card when that happens. So yeah, freezing your credit wouldn't have prevented that type of fraud where someone's trying these transactions. And if I hadn't caught it right away, I'm sure they would have kept trying more and the transactions would have gotten larger until finally you shut the card down. But it would help from people opening cards in your name. And so from that standpoint, now I think you can use an app and lock and unlock from your phone, which would make it a little bit more convenient.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think credit freezing, the risk really is that most of the time, you're not going to be a victim of somebody opening an account in your name. It's very difficult to do that and pass the verification of major credit card issuers. Although I'm sure some listeners had it happen to them, and ultimately there can be some value in freezing your credit, but there's also some downsides. And mostly that once you do it, you're often not thinking about your credit a lot. And then when it comes time to buy a house or you're going to go get another car, it can delay those transactions and cause a lot of issues when they go to pull your credit. You think about, or you're going to go get a car on sale, during this very short period of time, and then you have to delay the sale or the model you want gets bought because the dealer doesn't hold it for you while you're dealing with unlocking your credit. That can be a more, I'd say, practical downside to it that oftentimes will outweigh the risk. There are also a lot of companies that try to sell you things that maybe you don't fully need. And so I'll give you an example. So there's 3 major credit card bureaus, right? There's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Experian, I think, has a great app. You can download it. You can create a username. Every time I log on, they try to get me to pay a monthly fee. All I want to do is just be able to go in and check my credit, once a year and see what my score is, see if there's been any weird inquiries. That's all you really need to do at a minimum. Paying for the dark web monitoring and all this other stuff, I'm not an expert on it, but it doesn't really pass the smell test. And I think when, you're trying to be even some services that you pay a lot of money for, can be annual fees of hundreds of dollars. It's not exactly clear what they do. But in certain cases, it can be worth the risk. Like if your lifestyle involves a lot of, credit or a lot of different kinds of accounts or international accounts, I think some of that can be worth it. The more complex your life, the more valuable some of those oversight services can be.
Yeah, and a lot of times now, credit cards or your banking service already includes a lot of those monitoring services, so you can check within your app or log in and see what types of services may automatically be included. But, there was something else I was going to say too. Poof. I'll tell you when it comes back.
I do. I don't have any stats on this, but I've heard this anecdotally, and so I'm sure the comments on the channel will correct me if I'm wrong. But ultimately, I think one of the reasons that a lot of credit card at point of sale have shifted to tap is because it's more secure too. You're not swiping and you're not, putting yourself in a position even with the chip where you're inserting, it's more physical. It can get hacked. So even just getting used to tapping the card, or if you have a really old card you haven't had replaced, get it replaced so you can use the tap feature. Those small little things make a big difference.
Yeah, and that's because of the card readers. So there used to be some kind of device, I'm sure there still is, that someone could insert in the things that you slide the card down. I actually had my card hacked by this, I believe. It was many, many years ago. I did a driving trip to Vegas, and as soon as I got back, fraudulent charges started to show up on my card. And I remember this one gas station I stopped at in the middle of nowhere, and I'm sure it was from sliding my card that they could read the data. And so I think by tapping, it's much more difficult for those devices to gather the data. I also remembered what I was going to say, which is one of the things that can happen is Social Security fraud. And so this is the case where somebody gets your information, redirects Social Security once you're receiving it to deposit that into a different bank account. And so at the beginning of this year, I don't know if people remember, but there was all this stuff in the news about Social Security and the changes they were making. And basically, they were revamping the system and not allowing people to change their bank accounts online. And I'm not sure where all of that landed. But one of the reasons they were doing that was to try to prevent this type of fraud, to say, okay, if it's super easy to go change your bank account online, then someone can hack into your Social Security account. Again, a lot of people didn't have the extra security set up, and now they've changed your bank account and you're not getting your Social Security checks, and it can be very, very difficult to change it back. So that's another thing that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, and a lot of seniors ultimately don't really keep an eye on their checking account, that frequently. They kind of get paper statements in the mail, and so it takes a while to get caught up on that. Mentioning Social Security fraud also reminds me of just elder abuse in general. And Dana, I'm curious your thoughts. A lot of statistics will show that. I don't have any specific off the top of my head, unfortunately, but we see it all the time where elder abuse will often come from somebody that you know. Sometimes even a family member. And that's true for a lot of abuse, right? It's going to be somebody that's familiar with you taking advantage. In your career, have you seen, or experienced or have any tips for people that, have experienced that kind of elder abuse? And for the audience at home, what can they do when they spot it?
It's a really good question. Luckily, I haven't seen it among our clients, but I did see it in my family. So I had a family situation. It was with a great aunt. I think that's the technical, let's think about this. My dad's dad, so my grandpa's sister.
Okay. We'll get a family tree to put on the...
Anyway, she lived in Colfax, Iowa, and she had these caretakers. She was 90. She'd started to lose her sight. She was single. And so she had these caretakers come in, and my dad lived about 15 miles away, so he would come over and check on her, and they had convinced her that he was trying to steal her money. But once, on one visit, when he stopped there, he was in the garage checking some things out, and the neighbor came, and the neighbor hid behind the garage and came out to grab my dad and was like, Glenn, got to tell you what's going on. And the neighbor reported all these strange things he was seeing. And so what had happened is the caretakers had put a freezer in her garage. They would load up on stuff, order food, nice steaks, all of this stuff, load it up in the freezer. And then at night, they would have their spouses come and take things out. They had ordered all kinds of things, like Victoria's Secret. My aunt was not ordering from Victoria's Secret at 90 years old. And so that stuff was coming. It was being shipped directly to her house, but they were charging it. And then how Dad really got involved is there was some kind of donation my aunt wanted to make to a business, a large, like 50 or 60 grand. And it turns out it was a business owned by one of the caretaker's spouses. And so this did all come to light. My dad was able to track it down, but my aunt was very, opposed to my dad getting involved. She, at this point, these people were there. It was someone close to her, as you said, not a family member, but these people were in her daily life. So they had become close. She trusted them. And she even tried to tell my dad at one point, look, they just made a little mistake, right? Let's hire them back. I don't want to fire them. And so I think all in all, it was about $300,000 that they had, gotten away with spending on themselves and charged to her. And so that was a situation, although luckily I haven't seen it in our clients, where you realize, how vulnerable people can be and they can trust someone new in their life. I think a good thing to watch out for, and this could tie into romance scams too, is when you meet someone new, it could be a caretaker, someone trying to sell you something, they come door to door, they're posing as a contractor. There's never a hurry. If you start to feel really strong emotions, that's a caution. That could be a sign of manipulation. If you're feeling really scared or like you're falling in love, those are things, and it's not, that you just need to say, whoa, why is this happening so fast? Why am I so emotionally engaged? People who are good con artists are just masters at creating those types of emotions that cause us to not think rationally.
Absolutely. Some of these stories are scary. I'm going to start performing background checks on all my new friends. Moving forward, that's a personal policy.
Yes, you want to be my friend? Social security number, please. Sign this background check affidavit.
So a lot of the cybersecurity type fraud, it's very technology focused, but in general, financial fraud has been going on for a very, very long time. What other types of fraud, should people be aware of? I know construction fraud is one that is not often talked about, but it's been in the news. And so an example of this would be you talk to a door-to-door salesman that is selling you solar panels, and you write a check, and then nobody actually investigates whether the panels are being installed, and then you actually go up there because the electric bill doesn't change, and they send somebody out, and it turns out they're just nailing some 2x4s into your ceiling.
This happened to a friend of mine.
There you go.
Yep. They were building a new house and on a lake. Or they were building a dock on the lake, and she had found someone and paid them a pretty significant advance up front, and the person never did the work. And come to find out, when they did some investigation, there was some really bad reviews online for that person, but they hadn't done that kind of background checking, and so it was a very expensive lesson learned. Yeah, contractor fraud. You called it construction fraud, but I think they're the same, right? It can happen with people coming door to door, maybe to fix your roof, maybe, they want to trim your trees, but anyone who's asking for money up front and not having done the work, that could be a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easier than ever to vet those vendors, and even just Yelp, Facebook review, like all those kinds of things make it really easy. And if you have a company that doesn't have any online presence, unless it's, a sole proprietor or somebody in your neighborhood that, is just kind of working, as a sole proprietor, it's pretty rare, right? Most companies are going to have some kind of online presence.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways where maybe technology does offer some improvement. We've used Thumbtack. I don't know how many people out there have heard of Thumbtack.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I think I've got the name right. Oh, if I have the name wrong, we'll post it in the notes afterwards. But Thumbtack, I believe it's an app where you can find handyman or contractors, and they have reviews. And I don't know that they're background checked, but clearly, if they did what we just talked about, then the reviews would be bad on there. And so that's a way we've vetted people who we needed to come to the house and do, whether it be plumbing or we had roofing or, we had irrigation, different issues like that.
That's a great point. And then it shifts the liability, right, to that other company, because they're the ones kind of vetting for you.
Yep.
We actually do the same thing with babysitters. There's an app here called Busy Bees.
Yes.
And so for my daughter, it's very, excellent because I don't have a whole roster of high school or college-aged women that can go, babysit my daughter. But, you can use the app and they'll vet them for you. And, so we have a high degree of confidence in it.
Yeah. Other scams, I don't know. Let's see. We talked about email, what I call lurking, right? And so that is to watch out for. We talked about the importance of having your right kind of passwords, not reusing passwords, using two-factor authentication. We talked about romance, the technical terms phishing. If people have heard of phishing with a PH is what you were referring to in terms of emails where they're trying to get you to click on a link. That link is going to download malicious software of some kind that's going to record your activity. Same text messages, social media. They could be impersonating. Well, I had someone impersonate me.
Yes, this is a crazy story.
Yeah. So we had someone email us and say, look, is this you? There's this Facebook group. It's touting this investment club. They want to charge a monthly fee. And we went and checked it out, and it had my photo. It had your photo on there.
Yeah.
And that was somebody who had set up a whole online group posing as me and some of our staff and touting some kind of investment club. And we did our best to get it shut down, but it's hard.
They're always trying to get you to go to like a WhatsApp. And so that's how, because I guess WhatsApp is, I don't know, a little more Wild West than other social medias. But I mean, what I've learned from that whole situation, and even just peers in our industry that the same thing has happened to, is social media companies. I don't know if it's an incentive issue or a resource issue, but they have no reliable, scalable way to stop that kind of stuff from happening. Like you can't pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, stop this. It's running rampant. I mean, even on YouTube, I can almost guarantee in the comments of this video when it posts, there's going to be somebody going, wow, well, this video is so great. I wish I had a financial advisor, but I just don't know who to hire. And then it'll be a comment from somebody else going, oh, I used Mary Van Winkle. And then it'll go, oh, she's great. I got X% return. And then it'll be a link to the website. Yep. And they'll post instantly. And you see them on videos all over the place. If we see one, I'll comment on it and say, this is what I was talking about.
Yes. And they're bots, right? Automatic bots that are doing this. So I think it's a really good point back to what you brought up earlier around behavioral, right? How do we train ourselves behaviorally to recognize some of these things? How do we not react, not get click happy? How do we go do the research independently, not by using the links that are sent to us, but instead going out and Google Google searching. But I've even seen very sophisticated scams where if you go online and you do a search, they will have created fake reviews and fake websites that will come up to really try to establish legitimacy. But if you scroll down a little farther, you'll eventually find some things that say, yeah, I don't think that's real. But if they're really good, they've put the effort into creating that whole online presence to make it look legit.
With the SEO. And that, if you're a high profile person, or even just anybody, like the more wealth you have, the more target, the bigger target you'll be for something like this. You should really control your online presence too.
Yes.
And because even like, with your scam of people with the fake profile, well, there were tons of people that knew your real profile. So it was really easy for them to say, hey, that's not Dana.
Yeah. Yeah, and they thankfully reached out to me and even tracked us down, and said, hey, we just want to know, is this you? And I had a few of them all within the same week. So I'm hoping that, that was caught pretty quickly. And I really hope nobody lost any money and, falling for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of financial fraud, can we talk about Ponzi schemes?
Oh, my goodness.
The hottest button topic. So for background of everybody, because I don't think people know this, when they hear Ponzi scheme, the first thing they think is Bernie Madoff. We can talk about a little bit about that. But it's actually called a Ponzi scheme because of a man named Charles Ponzi from 1920 who kind of was promising these super high returns, and he would, take money from investors and then use future investors' money to pay back the original investors to mimic the return. And so that's been known as a Ponzi scheme. I think it's the only scheme that's named after a real human being, and it's still prevalent to this day.
So prevalent. So I actually heard Harry Markopoulos speak. It was, I don't know, maybe around 2010. And so he is sometimes credited as the guy who brought down Bernie Madoff. He actually wrote a book. I can't think of the name of it right now. I'm having trouble with that lately. But it's fabulous. But he talked about, simply the fact that he was studying the returns that were being posted and saying, this isn't possible. And so one of the things to watch out for is something that looks too good to be true. So there is simply no such thing as consistently high returns with low risk. It just doesn't exist. We all want to believe it exists. I actually wrote a post for the Retirement Manifesto going, I want to believe in unicorns, about my own stories around, wanting to find that next Apple stock or, something that's going to just, obviously take off and make you a significant amount of money in a short amount of time. That's the dream, right? And so most of these Ponzi scams prey on that. I did see a client fall for one once. They were about ready to retire. We had their whole plan, and we were going to send them a couple $1,000s a month from their portfolio. And they came in and said, Dana, you're not going to need to send me any money. I have found a currency trading investment. This guy, I put $80,000 with him. It's paying me $4,000 a month. And so you're not going to need to send me any money. And I remember just thinking inside, oh no. I knew instantly it had to be a scam because those kinds of returns aren't possible. And I know that without a doubt, like it was just no question, but my client was getting checks. And so he was so sure that there wasn't even any, ability to hear me. So, well, no, these are checks I'm getting. And I think he got about 3 months worth of checks, and then the whole thing unraveled, and it did, come to light that it had been a Ponzi scheme. And so his investment was lost. Luckily, it wasn't the bulk of his funds. He had, the bulk of his money in a retirement portfolio, and we were able to set up his retirement, income as we had originally planned.
And for that client, did you ever learn how they were originally made aware of the currency scheme?
I don't remember. I am going to guess it was probably from a friend.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going. And I think it's so important for people to understand that the reason these things happen, it's never because somebody just approaches you at a bar or a hotel and says, hey, I have this great investment opportunity. And every opportunity, by the way, that you're pitched for an investment will always sound like a great opportunity. Even if they're legitimate, that's kind of the point. Nobody's ever going to come to you and say, hey, this is a pretty lousy investment opportunity. Please give me your money. And so it can sound just like a legitimate one. And the best fraudsters know how to structure it that way. Or a lot of the time, maybe they've been successful in the past. Bernie Madoff was like that. He had a whole successful career before he started Ponzi scheming, which is a different kind of psychological issue. But for a lot of these fraudsters, they use basically agency, meaning that they're going to lean on you referring your friends to the investment. And it gets people to let their guard down almost immediately. If Dana comes to me and says, hey, I've been invested in this thing for a year, it's getting these great returns, you should check it out. Let me introduce you to this person. Well, I know Dana's pretty smart, so I'm going to let my guard down. But maybe Dana heard about it from, her nephew or something like that. I don't know if you have a nephew, but
I do.
So there you go. Right. And so it just creates this chain, but you never know who the root source was. And so the other thing you have to be really careful of now, we're recording this in 2025, private markets are all over the news. It's kind of like one of the hot new investment trends. There's just been legislation passed that will allow them to be accessed in 401k plans.
I don't know if it's allowed them to be accessed or if it was basically like, hey, let's look into allowing them to be accessed. So I don't know. Maybe you do know though.
my understanding of it was that the order was going to allow 401ks to
actually access them.
And we will have more information on this probably in a different kind of episode. But the reason I bring it up is because the whole nature of a private market investment is that it's illiquid. There's no transparency. And one of the benefits of buying something that you can see digitally that's tracked, at market level every day, mark to market every single day, like a public instrument, is that there's a lot more price transparency. And so one of the challenges with any kind of private market investment is getting information, and that makes it more susceptible for fraudsters. And so any illiquid investment, usually you can't go to Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard and say, hey, I want to take IRA money and buy this investment. You have to go open up what's called a self-directed IRA or write a direct check, from your bank account into these investments. And at that point, like the fraudster could take it and run, and the reporting could be totally fake and you just have no idea.
Yeah, and you mentioned agency, and I know we started talking about Ponzi schemes, but the worst situation I've ever seen firsthand, it was not a Ponzi scheme, but it did involve, an affiliation, someone with the same religious affiliation as them. And so they had been my client, and they went to another firm that went to their, church. And so I don't know how this firm talked them into this, but they basically put millions of dollars that they signed away on 2 promissory notes. And you want to talk about private, like literally it was like a 3-page promissory note where it promised to pay them a 12% rate of return. And that's it. It's like a 3-page document that you signed that maybe someone pulled off the internet on a promissory note template. And so how I became involved again is, they had left my firm. It was prior to me starting Sensible Money. They had left my firm, and very nicely, we've appreciated everything we've done, but, these people are closer, and, they go to our church. And so it was about 2 years later, they came back and said, can you help us figure out where our money is? And I'm reading through the documents, and I remember sitting in the conference room going white as a sheet. Like literally, I think all the blood drained out of my face because I'm reading this promissory note and I'm thinking, oh, no, like this is not good. And I ended up referring them to an attorney. I don't know what the outcome was. The challenge became at that point is if they, file a lawsuit or a complaint and that firm shuts down, they never get their money back. And so it just became this, wow, like what is a way that they can try to get some of their money back? If I remember correctly, I think what happened is they signed some kind of settlement agreement. They were supposed to be receiving payments, and they got maybe 2 or 3 months worth of payments, and then that firm or person filed bankruptcy, poof. And so they ended up losing $4 million. $4 million
Wow.
and their entire life savings on it just worst one I've ever seen firsthand.
That's so frightening. And what always perplexes me about these situations is when you look at the risk versus reward, even if the investment was legitimate, it's like, okay, so the promissory note, maybe it was returning like 1 or 2% more than what you could get in a traditional portfolio. It's never something life-changing where it's like you're going to get tens of millions of dollars more. And so then, it always goes back to pretty much every investment mistake you can make, fear and greed, right? People go, hey, I think this investment sounds so good. It feels good to have access to something other people don't and get that unicorn investment. But the biggest thing you can do as an investor in general to protect yourself is step back and go, why am I investing it in the first place? Is it even worth the risk? And a lot of the time that answer is no, it's not. It's not going to change your retirement income. It's not going to change your life. So why even pursue it?
Yeah, and that applies to single stock risk too, but that's a conversation for another day.
Right.
Yeah, and trust. You said fear, greed, and I would also say trust is a behavioral factor that's involved. So, in the case that I was just sharing, there was just simply a lot of trust there to say, oh, I trust this person. In the Ponzi schemes that we were talking about, right? You hear it from a trusted friend. And so that makes you let your guard down and not do your normal due diligence.
Absolutely. And the one other thing I'll say is, as far as action items, if you ever are aware or made aware of fraud or you become a victim of one, report it. Report it to the FTC. It's not like authorities have some magic way to find these things. And there are tip lines out there that will, bring the light who these criminals are.
Yep.
And the sooner you can shut them down, the better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And have, set up your, I want to call it your safety board.
Yeah.
We were talking about, you talked about if you're working with an elderly parent or even for yourself, right? If you're not sure about something, is it, a spouse you can verify with? If you're married, if you're single, is there a friend, an attorney, an accountant, an advisor, somebody that you can designate as your, hey, I want to run this by you before I click on this, or I want to run this by you before I say yes to this. If I were ever to go try some crazy investment again, I absolutely knew if I came to CJ and said, I ran this by CJ, he'd be like, no. His natural skepticism would come out. He would do the due diligence. And you need that person, right? I can be prone, luckily, with just little small parts of my money to try to go to experiment with things. And it's okay because I keep it to a very small portion of my money. But thank goodness, because of my training, right. I keep the bulk of my money in diversified, what I would call plain vanilla diversified portfolios. But you need that person that can run things by, that can help be your safety check.
Absolutely. Any other final tips or thoughts?
Be diligent. Be careful. I think we've covered them all, but just it's a dangerous world out there. Be aware. Read about this. We're going to have plenty of links in the podcast notes, so you can go read some of the articles that we've referenced. And the more you can educate yourself, the safer you're going to be. Yeah,
education is definitely empowering, and ultimately, we don't want people to be losing sleep at night over this. And so, the more you can protect yourself now, then the more you don't have to think about it in the future. And ultimately, you can just enjoy your retirement.
Absolutely. That's the goal.
Well, thank you very much, Dana, and thank you all for listening.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Making Retirement Make Sense. If you found it helpful, please like, subscribe, comment, and share it with someone who you feel could benefit from what we discussed today. And if you're feeling extra generous, we'd welcome a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.